Allen Lund Company looks forward to seeing you at Matt's in March.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Redding.
President Trump plans to impose tariffs on Mexico and Canada on March 1st unless he gets some concessions on border security. So let's play that out. What effect would the proposed tariffs have on the trucking industry, the supply chain, and freight rates? The truth is, we can't be entirely sure, but Jason Miller has an idea. He's the interim chair of the Department of Supply Chain Management at Michigan State University's Eli Broad College of Business, and he's crunched the numbers and done the analysis, and he has some very real concerns. Also on today's program, market conditions are starting to ramp up, according to Truckstop. We speak with Brent Hutto, who says 2025 will be a year of increasing rates. But first, the news with Ashley Blackford.
Thanks, Mark. President Trump has tapped an Apple executive to be the next leader of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Jonathan Morrison served in the first Trump administration as chief counsel of the agency. If confirmed to the post, Morrison would be in charge of auto safety and multiple ongoing probes into Tesla's advanced driver assistance system. Tesla's CEO, of course, is Elon Musk, who has become one of President Trump's closest advisors in recent months. In answering a question from Senator Ed Markey of Massachusetts during his confirmation hearing, Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy said he would allow the investigations into Tesla to continue.
At the moment, the National Highway Transportation Administration is conducting an investigation into a number of car manufacturers, including Tesla's full self-driving. And the question I'd ask you is, regardless of outside political pressure, can you commit to allowing the traffic safety investigators to follow the evidence and operate objectively as part of their investigations?
Senator, I appreciated it and enjoyed our meeting in your office. There's a history there that I was not all aware of, and I'm grateful that you shared that with me. Yes, I commit to this committee and to you that I will let NHTSA do their investigation. And I think I also mentioned to you that a lot of the players in these spaces, I haven't met any of them. So yes, to your answer.
There's going to be a lot of pressure, but you hear a lot of talk here about pedestrians being hit. You mentioned the number of people who die on our highways. We just have to make sure that we don't see history repeating unnecessarily.
Morrison, who also worked for the California New Car Dealers Association, will be subject to the Senate confirmation process as well. You know him, you hate him, but there's not much you can do about him unless you're able to avoid them. We're talking about the worst truck bottlenecks in the country. The American Transportation Research Institute is out with its annual report that highlights the most congested bottlenecks for trucks in America. And coming in at number 1 for the 7th year in a row, the intersection of I-95 and State Route 4 in Fort Lee, New Jersey. The rest of the top 10 are familiar to the list as well, with stretches of highway in Chicago, Houston, and Los Angeles making the list. But no city has as many bottlenecks as Atlanta in the top 10. 3 interchanges there made the list. ATRI's 2024 top truck bottleneck list measured the level of truck-involved congestion at over 325 locations on the national highway system. The report found that traffic conditions continue to deteriorate compared with recent years, in some cases due to work zones resulting from increased infrastructure investment. Average rush hour truck speeds were 34.2 miles per hour, down 3% from the previous year. Among the top 10 worst locations, average rush hour truck speeds were 29.7 miles an hour. The mayor of Vail, Colorado, is turning up the heat on state officials to strengthen chain laws in the state. Mayor Travis Kogan sent a letter to Governor Jared Polis this week, calling not just for stronger enforcement of existing laws, but steeper penalties for those who violate them. The mayor said the laws in place now aren't doing enough to deter those who ignore speed limits, lane restrictions, and chain-up requirements. He added that the current maximum fine of $1,157 for blocking a roadway is exceedingly low, considering analysis that indicates the cost of nearly $2 million for every hour I-70 is closed. Mayor Kogan called on state lawmakers last month to increase fines after an incident in which several semis got stuck on eastbound I-70 through Vail Pass amid winter weather, causing the highway to shut down. The mayor said those trucks had just passed a chain-up station. This is what he had to say at the time.
$500 clearly does not change anyone's mind. I think I saw on the Vail Daily the other day, like the first snowstorm, 12 truckers had blown by. Tim, you were, I think, on a Mustang. I mean, it's offensive to our community, and I would like to see if we can get Eagle, Summit, Clear Creek, Jefferson, Lake, and Pitkin counties, including every other municipality in between who's on I-70, because there needs to be points or there needs to be a $20,000 fine.
The current fine for not having chains when they're required in Colorado is up to $500 to $1,000 if a truck gets stuck. For a full rundown of Colorado chain laws and chain laws throughout North America, head to our resources tab on landline.media. A stretch of highway in New Jersey will be closed indefinitely for good reason. The state DOT first said eastbound Interstate 80 through Wharton in Morris County was closed out of an abundance of caution after a depression in the center lane was reported. Then, while crews were doing checks, road conditions got worse and the sinkhole opened up. Nobody was hurt, but it's going to take some time to fix. If this sounds familiar, it's because it's happened before. Back in December, Interstate 80 was closed after a 40-foot wide sinkhole opened up. The highway reopened 4 days later following emergency repairs. A stretch of Interstate 40 through North Carolina that collapsed during Hurricane Helene is set to reopen next month. State officials say 2 lanes of I-40 through the Pigeon River Gorge will reopen on March 1st. The road serves as a major corridor between North Carolina and Tennessee. North Carolina Governor Josh Stein made the announcement after meeting with Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy. Jack Cooper Transport Company is shutting down. The move comes after losing contracts with Ford and General Motors in recent weeks. Jack Cooper has started filing mass layoff notices in several states. Founded in 1928, Jack Cooper started off hauling vehicles for General Motors and expanded over the decades to become one of the nation's leading car haulers. And finally, a lost load in Northern California led to a giant game of pickup sticks late last week. The California Highway Patrol detailed what happened in a social media post when officers responded to a report of a traffic hazard on Interstate 580. Someone dumped a countless number of chopsticks on the highway, creating what the CHP said was a sticky situation. The CHP said the incident should serve as a reminder to all travelers to make sure their loads are properly secure. That's Landline Now News for today. I'm Ashley Blackford.
Thanks, Ashley. Congratulations to Dennis Lee Johnson of Clark, South Dakota. He's received the OOIDA Safe Driving Award for 43 years of safe, accident-free driving. That's the equivalent of a car driver going 323 years without causing a single accident. The OOIDA Safe Driving Award program is sponsored by Shell Rotella. Marty Ellis and OOIDA's tour truck, The Spirit of the American Trucker, are at the Petro Truckstop in El Paso, Texas. That's located at exit 37 on Interstate 10. Stop in, say hi to Marty, and join OOIDA for a $10 discount. Next, Scott Thompson discusses tariffs and their potential effect on trucking with Jason Miller of Michigan State University's Eli Broad College of Business. We'll be back in just a moment with more of the program. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Capital Reman, the leader in remanufactured diesel engines and components, has partnered with OOIDA to offer exclusive member benefits. Visit capitalreman.com today to support America's transportation industry and take advantage of your benefits.
Running on ultra-low sulfur diesel? Stay protected this winter with Howe's Diesel Treat and Diesel Lifeline. Steer clear of gel and ice with North America's #1 trusted brand. Find Howe's products nationwide at select retailers, auto parts stores, truck stops, and on Amazon.com.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
Landline Now, welcome back. We've got a lot of ground to cover with our next guest, who's been doing some great analysis on the looming tariff threats and their possible effects on the trucking industry. Professor Jason Miller is the interim chair of the Department of Supply Chain Management at Michigan State University's Eli Broad College of Business, and he joins us on the line now. Professor Miller, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
We got a lot to get to here. Before we get into all the variables kind of swirling about right now, and there are plenty of them for sure, can you give us kind of a quick checkup on the health of the trucking industry and the market right now? Where do things stand generally, I guess, in a big picture sense in the first half here of February?
Yeah, so things have cooled down substantially, certainly on the dry van spot truckload side over the last couple weeks. So, we've seen dollar per mile per DAT drop about 10 cents from, $2.16 in January to about $2.06 as of when we're talking. Tender rejection rates have dropped per freightways. We're now sub 6%. So kind of the usual cooling down of things in February. And so, the hopes that the recovery was, already here, I think had been dashed fairly thoroughly. And so right now it's kind of a wait-and-see situation to see what happens with March, because that's kind of when construction season kicks off. And then, like we're talking about, that's also when we have the potential to see major tariff increases actually take effect.
Yeah, and we're certainly going to talk about that quite a bit here. But excluding that, taking that out of the equation, it sounds like March to you, that's what you're really looking at here to see if this recovery is going to kind of, take shape the way so many people think it is?
Yeah, no, I definitely want to see what we start to, pick up happening in March. And also, too, to get a sense, where do we see, a lot of the new order purchasing manager type indices, either from the Federal Reserve Board or Institute for Supply Management. Where do those come at, from February? We've been seeing some nice upward increases for, let's say, manufacturers' new orders and the January data. But then the question is do we see continuing momentum, or do we start to see that momentum kind of stall out?
And I know you're somebody who looks back, at where we've been and kind of what it means for where we are now or where we're headed, I guess. Historically speaking, we seem to be kind of at this tail end of a bad end, really, of a normal cycle. Usually that means we're about to walk into a period of better days. And there is, I know, some optimism out there that 2025, we're going to see this turnaround. Historically speaking, is everything kind of, again, taking those variables out of the way, which we're going to talk about here in a second, but historically speaking, are we kind of in that place right now where, we should be about to enter that period of better days?
We should be. I mean, we've hit 100 basis points of interest rate cuts, and so that is going to start percolating its way through capital investment, which is a good thing for trucking, because when you really look at what drives the cyclicality of trucking demand, it's not consumer spending, it's housing starts, it's investment in machinery and things of that sort. The challenge is now is, every cycle is different. So if you go back to the 1990s, it was just a broad-based boom. In 2004, 5, and 6, you had the housing boom, which really drove a tremendous amount of freight demand. In 2013 and especially 2014, it was really a hydraulic fracking boom and the resulting demand for equipment and things of that sort, combined with agricultural commodities, were really elevated because of horrible drought in 2012. So that was, farm equipment and things like that. In 2017 and 2018, you had a business tax cut, a fracking boom, and then also the ELD mandate. As we go into 2025, really kind of all we have going for us right now that is already baked in is that 100 basis points of interest rate cuts. There's attempts to try to get, I think, another business tax cut through Congress, but that's going to take a while. There's a focus on deregulation, but that is also going to take a while. So we don't really quite have the tailwinds, I think, that we've had in the past. And the biggest challenge now is the discussion of tariffs is putting a lot of uncertainty about where inflation for, let's say, producers' cost structures are going to be at.
Yeah, let's talk about that now. You've done a lot of work and research and analysis on the tariff threats the Trump administration have sort of been lobbying at Mexico, Canada, and China. We should mention there's been a pause, of course, on most of the tariffs until March, although we did see the steel and aluminum tariffs kind of go into effect here, being talked about. We'll see what happens with all this. There's a lot of ground to cover here as well. But in short, I think it's safe to say you've got some very real concerns about the impact these tariffs would have on the trucking industry as a whole, right?
No, I certainly do. And the way I would frame it right now when we're talking is the biggest effect we're seeing right now is simply uncertainty about what is going to happen. That is going to force companies to curtail some investment because if I'm a auto parts maker in Michigan, I'm thinking of adding some new equipment or replacing equipment, but let's say 10 or 20% of my business goes cross-border to Canada. Well, all of a sudden, I'm going to keep that on hold until I see what happens with, potential tariffs on my goods as they'd enter Canada. So right now, the uncertainty with tariffs is certainly going to curtail some investment in the near term. The tariffs on China, these 10% tariffs, I quite frankly don't really understand the purpose because they're not enough that they're going to really change anything. But paradoxically, as economist Richard Baldwin has written about, they're actually hurting U.S. manufacturers because we import a lot of what we call intermediate inputs from China, basic chemicals, electronic components and things like that. Well, those just became more expensive for U.S. manufacturers, but they didn't become more expensive for Canadian and Mexican manufacturers. And with tariffs pushed off with those countries, you actually have made U.S. manufacturers less competitive in the United States, ironically enough. So that's not a good thing for domestic freight demand. And then, being in the state of Michigan, tariffs that would hit Mexico and Canada and affect the auto sector they would not be good for freight demand. Now, we've seen General Motors come out and say they think they can mitigate some of the effects. Ford has been a little bit more pessimistic about that. But there's certainly no doubt that in the near term, tariffs on Canada and Mexico would substantially negatively affect trucking demand growth in 2025, if not actually cause demand to further decrease.
With these conversations, if you're an individual truck driver out there, you're a small carrier, you hear all the conversations, you maybe wonder how it's going to affect you on a personal level, on a day-to-day basis, right? And that may be a hard question to answer here, but in terms of rates and in terms of the everyday, life of someone out there that's listening to this right now, what effect would these tariffs have if they go into full effect? Which sectors, I guess, of the industry as well would be hit the most? Yeah, so, especially looking at Canada and Mexico, the biggest impact in terms of freight demand is going to be on the motor vehicle and parts sector. It'll also be a negative impact for, let's say, primary metals, so, hauling steel and aluminum across the border from, Canada into the U.S. It's going to have a direct effect, especially the metals tariffs in general. It's going to make truck trailers more expensive. It's going to make replacement parts more expensive. And then especially if we see Canadian crude oil get tariffs, that's going to make diesel in the Midwest more expensive because roughly 70% of the oil that is refined in the Midwest comes from Canada. And you can't just switch out the heavy crude that we primarily process from Canada with U.S. light sweet crude from, let's say, the Permian Basin in Texas. And so there's no doubt that you're going to see some inflation in energy prices here in the Midwest. How long would it take to see those effects? Again, let's assume March 1st that these things, the tariffs go into effect. How long are we talking about before we start to feel those effects? From, let's say, producers that are using steel and aluminum, they'll feel the effects within a month or two because what you'll see is the domestic mills will raise their prices.
So it's not just that the imports become more expensive, but the number one response we see by producers is that they raise their prices if they're now protected. So steel and aluminum will get more expensive very quickly. We saw that occur in 2018 when steel prices rose almost 20% year over year, and when aluminum prices rose very quickly following the implementation of those tariffs as well. For energy prices, you're talking a couple weeks. You're going to see effects from an inflationary standpoint. From a demand destruction standpoint, it'll depend by sector. I do think the auto industry will be in for quite a shock initially as they try to adjust things in and of itself. That could change freight patterns up a little bit. And then we have to see how the consumer starts to respond, for buying vehicles and things like that. But, what I would remind everybody is that 2018 is when we put in tariffs that pale in comparison to what is being discussed that could be implemented in March of this year. And remember, 2018 was a great freight market for the first 3 quarters of the year, but things started to cool pretty quickly in Q4, and we were in a freight recession by Q1 of 19. There's kind of no reason to think anything different would happen from a standpoint of this is not pro-growth for the freight market.
Yeah, you mentioned 2018 there, and I was going to ask you about that. The tariffs then and the tariffs now are pretty different in terms of scale, right? Is that the biggest difference between what we saw in 2018 and what we're hearing, at least, being talked about right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So the tariffs in 2018, you had the metal tariffs that took place. And so that's the most similar, and there's been multiple studies on this, and the general conclusion was while it may have possibly slightly increased employment and output in the U.S. In those industries, the downstream sectors that use steel and aluminum saw job losses and production declines that more than offset any potential benefit. So on a net basis, that was actually negative for freight demand. And then the difference with the tariffs with China was back in 2018, 2019, those primarily targeted intermediate inputs for production. It didn't really target consumer goods due to concerns about inflation. That's not the case now. Everything's being targeted from China. So cell phones are going to be more expensive. Computers are going to be more expensive. Apparel will be more expensive. And so that's certainly a concern. And then Canada and Mexico, there were no, other than the steel and aluminum and washing machines, there were no tariffs really in place there that mattered. So that's where you've got it, just a totally different effect that we're looking at potentially here in March.
Yeah, and potentially, I think, is the key word to kind of underline and put in bold and italicize there, because I get the sense that, this is all negotiation, right? I think President Trump is trying to get, and we know he's trying to get concessions out of these countries. Do you get a sense that, at the end of the day, we're going to get some sort of compromise or some sort of escape hatch, I guess, here in terms of not going through with this? I guess what sense do you get in terms of what is trying to be accomplished here?
That I honestly don't really know on that front.
But here's what we do know on that front. Professor Miller has a lot more to say about the tariffs, the current state of the trucking industry, and how the rest of 2025 might look as we ramp up toward recovery. So we'll leave it there for a moment, but after the break, we'll pick it right back up with Jason Miller of Michigan State University's Eli Broad College of Business.
Are you tired of the IRS following you around like a dark cloud? Call 888-557-4020 and get your life back.
At Truckstop, we built a better load board for carriers like you. Sign up today and access over 600,000 loads on the most trusted online load board. Learn why the best in the business rely on Truckstop to make more money and start driving your profit today.
Welcome back to Landline Now. When we last left you, we were talking with Jason Miller of Michigan State University's Eli Broad College of Business about the proposed tariffs and their possible effect on the trucking industry. That's where we pick things back up. I get the sense that, this is all negotiation, right? I think President Trump is trying to get, and we know he's trying to get concessions out of these countries. Do you get a sense that, at the end of the day, we're going to get some sort of compromise or some sort of escape hatch, I guess, here in terms of not going through with this? I guess what sense do you get in terms of what is trying to be accomplished here?
That I honestly don't really know on that front. And the challenge is the administration has given like 4 or 5 different explanations for tariffs. And depending on the one you pick, you could see a scenario where they do go forward or they don't go forward. And so, this is the challenge, is it's completely unpredictable at the moment in terms of what may actually happen. And so, because of that, I really don't know the answer. I mean, the president recently indicated that he wasn't satisfied with the progress that Canada and Mexico were making on border security, so that would suggest something does happen in March. What I will say is, if we go through the next 48 months not knowing if massive tariffs are going to be implemented, that is not a good thing for the trucking sector, because it will curtail capital investment, and that means less freight movement.
Yeah, and what you're talking about there is that uncertainty that you highlighted earlier, and uncertainty when you're looking at, trying to do business and trying to make sure that, things are moving in the way that they need to move. Uncertainty is really a killer, isn't it? And that's kind of the issue here, isn't it?
No, and that is the issue, because, the challenge is, and for folks listening here saying, well, wouldn't companies just move production to the U.S. and solve all of this? Well, the challenge is who wants to open a factory, spend $50 million on equipment, and then all of a sudden have the tariffs not be implemented? And therefore, you're now producing a good in the United States that is not cost competitive against a good produced in Mexico. And so this is the challenge, is the uncertainty about tariffs basically just puts everybody on pause. And pause isn't good for freight demand. And the reality is, in some ways, it's either better to move one way, either say, okay, this is just negotiation tactic, try to redo the USMCA and see if you're going to get that much more than you've already got. I'm skeptical of that. Or just put the tariffs in place and, I hate to say it, see what happens. I mean, again, most of us with an economics background are urging not to do that. But, maybe we're all wrong. Unfortunately, we do have a tail of the tape from 2018, 2019, and it's not encouraging, because I think any of the listeners out here know 2019 was not a good year for freight demand.
Yeah. Is there, talking about uncertainty and looking at that, at everything that's out there and what we don't know, is there anything motor carriers, and I know retailers have been sort of preparing here, at least in the short term, to kind of weather the storm should these go into effect? Is there anything motor carriers, our listeners out there, can or should be doing to maybe get in front of all of this, or are we really just in wait-and-see territory?
There's not really much, you can do, because we don't know what is actually going to be implemented. So I think the biggest thing is to try to have different scenarios planned out. I think talk to your key shippers and try to get a sense of what their plans are, depending on how these scenarios unfold. And so I think, this is one where, honest communication with your key customers is going to be critical. I could see some firms, if they were thinking of expanding, pausing expansion at the moment to say, maybe we don't want to do this. But on the other hand, if we tariff, Class 8 vehicles imported from Mexico 25%, equipment just became substantially more expensive for a lot of folks. And so the decision would be, well, I'm going to buy that vehicle now before anything could hit. So it really is going to come down to a case-by-case basis, and just, kind of, I'd say each company's individual scenario is going to have to drive decision making. But I think the big thing is just planning for different potential scenarios in 2025.
I want to delve into a little more of a hypothetical here. Again, in a scenario where on March 1st, these tariffs do go into effect here, is there any scenario in which they do get implemented as planned and trucking still has a good year in 2025?
I find it certainly if the Canada-Mexico tariffs get fully implemented, I get skeptical that we'll see a substantial increase in freight demand at that point in time, just because of uncertainty, because of inflation. If the Fed has to start raising interest rates again, that will be the thing that will absolutely keep a recovery from really happening. Right now, the only thing that could save things if the tariffs are implemented would be if Congress would get a massive tax cut through. But I would tell you my concern at that point is going to be inflationary, and then the Fed's going to have to start raising interest rates. And, we're kind of back to square one at that point.
And then even going out further than that, 2026, I would imagine if that was a scenario in 2025, 2026 would look even worse, potentially?
That would depend on how much is being implemented. Let's say business tax cuts get through, and even if the Fed raises interest rates, if in 2026 the tariffs get removed, then it should be quite a good year at that point in time, because then you've got that initial sort of goosing of activity from the business tax cuts, and the tariffs being removed would help be a little bit of a lower inflationary environment right now. I know there's some speculation of, maybe, cutting government spending and this and that. Well, if you're cutting spending by firing people, that's not good for freight demand if more people are unemployed. So, to me, the best case scenario in 2025 is tariffs are not really implemented. The president sends a clear, strong signal that he's happy with what he's received from Mexico and Canada. Those tariffs are off the table. Anything else with the rest of the world is fairly muted. I mean, for example, there's been a lot of discussion of the U.S. putting in place essentially reciprocal tariffs. So if you tariff our good 15%, we're going to tariff you 15%. That won't be that big of a deal because in general, the numbers are actually quite low. Ironically, we tariff China much more than China tariffs us. So technically we should lower our tariffs with China, but I don't see that happening. But that tariff I don't worry about as much. The broader concern is, the worst case scenario is, China tariffs get raised, Mexico, Canada go in across the board as they were proposed. We then start tariffing the European Union, and then we tariff Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea, because we almost have to do that at that point. Otherwise, Japanese and South Korean cars just became a heck of a lot more cost competitive in the U.S., the ones that are made over there. And so that's when essentially you have the United States in an all-out trade war with the entire rest of the world. And that will, in my view, if that happens, you'll actually see freight demand start to fall on the other side of all of this getting implemented for, let's say, 4 to 6 months.
Yeah, and given all of that you just laid out there, I find it hard to believe that we're heading down this route. And again, I don't know. I'm sure that the president has advisors laying this out for him as well. So I get the sense, and I'm not going to ask you to predict necessarily where we're headed, but do you get a sense that this is going to kind of cool off a little bit, and we're going to not put all these barriers in place? This is where it's what is the intention of the tariff? Yeah. If the intention is to try to raise revenue, which has been discussed, then you kind of have to put extensive tariffs in place. So that's where there's a major challenge is what is the intention? If the intention is tariffs for negotiation, then very likely these don't get implemented. But on the other hand, if tariffs are a revenue tool, then they have to be implemented. Otherwise, you don't have revenue. Yeah. We've been, I guess, somewhat pessimistic here. Maybe pragmatic is a better word, but optimism. What do you see out there right now that makes you optimistic for the next 12 months or so?
The biggest thing right now is just demand and supply are in equilibrium at the moment. We saw the seasonal tightening in December. January's horrible weather probably contributed to the spot market being tighter. So we're at least at a point where the market's in equilibrium. So all we need is just a little bit of an increase in demand, and we should be in a bull market cycle. I'd caution everybody that no one is expecting a back half of 2017 type of bull market this year. I don't think anybody is predicting, that type of strength.
Interesting. See, you and this has been the talk, I think, for a while now, but when we talk about recovery, we're talking more of a slow incline as opposed to kind of a boom, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, I don't see anything like the back half of 2017 taking place, and that from a spot pricing standpoint or a demand growth standpoint, because some of the key demand drivers that we saw in 2017, for example, fracking, the oil drillers have been very clear in saying they're not planning on increasing oil drilling very much this year. And the simple reason is that the economics don't support it anymore. So that's going to take a lot of, back in 2017, we saw fracking demand really come roaring back from a low in 2016 because oil prices started to come up. Unless oil prices go through the roof, which is bad, in general is not a good thing for anybody. We're not going to see that fracking demand materialize. We're not going to see with where housing prices are at right now and where 30-year mortgage rates are at, the housing market's not going to unthaw itself completely this year. So while we should see an increase in home building, it's not going to be an explosion of home building because of affordability issues. And so I just don't see the demand drivers there this year to make it a 2017 style market. And then also in 2017, you had the ELD mandate looming.
Right. It's been such a tough couple years for everybody out there kind of weathering the storm and looking for brighter days. As we all kind of wait for this thing to turn around, for these better days to come, do you have anything to say to the folks out there who have been weathering the storm, who are looking for, forward to kind of not sweating it out every day in terms of, making a living? What advice would you have for them here as we kind of close things out?
Other than just, right now, hopefully with some sensible government policy, the worst is behind us and the better days are coming here in the next couple months. This is one of the few times where I'd say government policy can directly change where we're at. And so hopefully we get good policy.
Yeah, we will see what happens here. It is certainly not a dull moment, never a dull moment in terms of what we're seeing out there. Jason, we really appreciate your time, your expertise, your input on all this, and we'll reach out to you again if and when these tariffs go into effect to see what happens there. We appreciate it.
Yep, thanks for having me.
Our thanks to Jason Miller of Michigan State University. We'll take a break now, but hang tight. Landline Now is back in just a moment.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com, because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Landline Now, welcome back. If you're hauling freight and running your own business, you need to keep track of some basic facts and figures that can determine whether you succeed or fail. And that includes finding the freight and how much money you can make hauling it. Today, Landline Now's Ashley Blackford will bring us some of that information and get some insight as to why things are happening with the folks from Truckstop.com. Here's Ashley now with a report.
Thanks, Mark, and hello to Brent Hutto with Truckstop. How are you doing today, Brent?
Man, Ashley, I'm doing great. I'm down in Miami, Florida. It's about 82 degrees, sunny out. I was outside yesterday. I even had to make sure I covered up because I was getting a sunburn. So I know all of America is not in the same temperature-wise, but it's pretty good. I'm down here at a financial conference for trucking. There's a lot of the investors and people like that, the market and the bigger players that are talking about how the market's doing. So it's really fun to be around sort of the neural network of how logistics happens.
Nice. Now, speaking of the market, today's theme song, Philadelphia Freedom, is that a little dig at Kansas City?
Well, look, hey, I love my friends in Kansas City. And I know they suffered a defeat this past weekend, but part of it was that. The other part was just a kind of a fun song. But yeah, hey, look, the good thing about this is there's the competition, and the NFL is not unlike trucking. Each year brings a new challenge. Each year brings a new opportunity to do things in the market, and really just kind of continuing to stay focused. And the fact that we get to work in an open marketplace where anybody from a one truck owner operator to Knight Swift can figure out how they can make success. And like I said at the very end of it, and just keep on trucking, which is fun because that's really what trucking is about. Same thing with football. Each year is a new opportunity to win the big prize, but that doesn't mean that you don't have to do it the next year. So sort of a lot of the same things, but yeah, a little bit, but just kind of having fun with it.
And I mean, looking at market conditions, what are things looking like? Yeah,
well, here's the thing, and right now we're in the beginning of February. All right, so what I would say to every owner operator out there, every small fleet out there is, the end of January and the February months are the final months where the bids or the contracts that are signed in the market are all signed up. So you have like a little bit of a 3 or 4 week lull. So it's a little depressed in the marketplace, and that's what we're going through right now in the marketplace. The pressure's still up in the market, but load posting volumes for the spot market are basically even with a 5-year average. That's a great thing, okay? There's still plenty of freight in the marketplace. Rates have gone down in the last 2 weeks and kind of substantially in a couple of areas. But remember, the rates that I talk about are just the posted rates, and so you want to negotiate off of those. You need to use your experience. Every owner-operator needs to use their experience. Okay, I've been in the market this long. I deliver at this ratio. I'm on time. I'm in full. I make sure that things are taken care of and your products are taken care of. You can get a higher rate that way, and the better relationship you have with your freight providers, whether it be a broker, whether you do business directly with a shipper, you really need to continue to leverage on your value to them. So, but rates kind of went down a little bit, but don't pay much attention to that because they'll start to come back up in the beginning of March as we kind of come into this year, which is going to be more healthy for the spot market where owner-operators play. So I know that because last year was an improvement and 2025 will be an improvement because the marketplace was so difficult. And again, as you and I have talked about over and over and over again, what's sort of the intangible that shows us that the spot market should continue to grow in freight volumes, which means rates will continue to move upward, is that the contract freight that's rejected, the outbound tender reject index, a figure by our friends at Freightways, so continues to stay above 5%. It has been going down the last 3 weeks, just like rates have. They follow each other. Last week it was right at 7%, but it dropped a percent, basically week over week, down to right at below 6%. But still, the thing is that it's still above 5%. So you still need to watch that from the standpoint of like the pressure in the marketplace. And that's just super important. I mean, what you look at is year over year. 2025 is still almost 15% from the amount of freight that has the opportunity to come into the spot market over 2024. So that's a good thing. 15% is not a low number, and it's been, and the outbound tender reject index has been above 5% for 19 straight weeks. So every week that goes by, it creates strength into more freight coming into the spot markets, which is good for the OIDA members and good for the Truckstop carrier customers because that's where they find their freight.
What are some of the top regions and lanes from last week?
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. And if you look, all freight is at one single, what they call OD pair, the pickup and the drop off. So all of them, every lane's unique. Different parts of the marketplace have shown some improvement. The Southeast continues to show improvement. That's generally where super heavy duty industrial production is in the Southeast. And there's a lot of flatbed in the Southeast. It's up week to week 19%. Everybody else is kind of even, down a little bit or up a little bit. But nationally, freight was up about load availability to owner-operators, up about 2.5%, which is a good thing as we continue to look at that. Rates themselves went down a couple percent, but like I said, they're still at like 226 in different parts of the market. I know that the dry van market went down to below $2. And this is where, excuse me, I'll complete this out. The flatbed marketplace went down 1 cent to 231. Refrigerated went down to 223. Refrigerated had a giant change in the last 3 weeks. But in the end, it comes back to this. What does it cost you to do your operation? Know your numbers, know what your cost is per mile to do your operation, and then base every piece of freight you move off of that. Not off of, hey, I like that piece of freight, that rate looks good. You need to know your numbers. And I know you guys at OIDA do a great job in helping educate owner-operators and try to understand their numbers. That's the biggest part of being successful in trucking is to know your efficiency, how quickly you're using that fuel. Well, some of the other areas in freight that look pretty good, you and I talked a little bit about this last week, that there's some areas that are changing. Well, I'm looking at dry van freight, and it looks like the top 3 increases of freight were all in Texas again. So we're kind of back to Texas again. I think that's probably a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction to, we're going to have tariffs in Mexico. We're not going to have tariffs in Mexico. We're going to have tariffs in Canada. We're not going to have tariffs in Canada. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot of unknowns out there in the market, but kind of like Texas is still strong there. Same thing in flatbed, although you've got some stuff out on the West Coast that has increased. Refrigerated some of the lanes in there. Houston to Brownsville, out of Dallas, out of Houston. Refrigerated, a lot of stuff coming cross-border into those towns and moving elsewhere. So those are the sort of top areas that you want to look at. But like I said, you need to know the region you like to haul in, and then dive deep into the data. If you need help, Truckstop's always here to help. Just call our customer support. We'll show you how to better search and itemize and understand what marketplace is the best for you.
Now, you mentioned tariffs. That's, of course, been a big topic of discussion. What's going on there, and what are some other things owner-operators should be aware of?
One of the big reflections of tariffs is that as tariffs kind of are putting pressure on things and in the marketplace, you see increases in areas like the number of containers coming in to the ports have increased because of the potential tariffs that are out there. So also some things on that. Now, this person from Mexico said something really interesting. He said that he felt like it was from a leverage standpoint of like country to country. It's not like America versus everybody else. He goes. It's really like he means the United States. It's more like, how is the United States and Mexico and Canada all working together to sort of leverage their power in the world against other nations that maybe are not looking to build this part of the world, which he was specifically pointing at China. But the point being is that you'll see freight increase. And all 3 of them said that they didn't think the tariffs would have a huge impact on the amount of freight that's moved the United States. And so that's a unique thing. But keep watching them because you'll see different changes in areas. And even like some fast fashion Chinese places, Temu and Shein, he said that they are making changes to do manufacturing in the United States so they can still sell their products. So, commerce goes forward.
Wonderful. Brent, thank you so much.
Man, my pleasure, Ashley. Thank you for what you do in helping owner-operators and small fleets be successful. Man, this industry needs OIDA, and we're glad to be partners with you.
That was Brent Hutto with Truckstop. Mark, back to you.
Thanks, Ashley. That's our program for today. Thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad,
a son,
a husband,
wife,
I'm a writer,
photographer,
I farm,
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
my kids,
Chrome, and I am
a professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us!
Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call
Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit ooida.com.